So they had to, before I was even 24 hours old, they had to go in and repair it. About 2 weeks later, I developed hydrocephalus, or water on the brain, and so I had the inability to have fluid drain from my head, so I had to put a shunt in. And what you see here is actually a valve that keeps the steady pressure in my head. It keeps the fluid pumping so that I don't die. So basically, that's what it does. It keeps things flowing like it's supposed to, which I'm excited about. So by 2 weeks old, I had had 2 surgeries, and over the course of the years, I've had 41 major operations. After my second one, my parents were told I would never walk, barely talk, be in diapers, and not be able to perform daily tasks. But as you can see, God showed up and showed off. So, I was really happy about that one too. Now you would think, well, that's enough for anybody to go through, but not so much. See, when I was 9, things got really bad for me. My father was an alcoholic and my mom was working 2 jobs as well as he was. One night, he was playing cards with his friends, and he sat me up on his lap. I was probably 8, and he taught me how to play cards. And I remember it so well that I ended up playing with my friends at the same age, and we were playing for pennies. So, I was exposed to gambling quite early. Also, around that same time, my sister and I were left with a babysitter, and over the course of a year and a half, I was molested at least 4 or 5 times. Things didn't stop for me there, though. You see, my sister was 2 years older than me, and she began to use drugs at an early age. And one night, she came into my room, and she tried to choke me out to get money to buy drugs. My father was an abusive man as well. See, he used to be a Marine, but he believed in corporal punishment. And his way of corporal punishment was smacking us and, using anything he could to spank us. He would even put trash in our beds if we forgot to take it out. By this time, I was 11, and my sister took over babysitting duties, which I, to this day, trying to figure out why that happened. But she did, and she had older friends come over that actually slept with boys and older men in front of me, and I was exposed to nudity at quite an early age. One time I was actually forced at gunpoint to watch my sister get raped. I began to be curious about the things my sister was doing, and at the age of 12, I'd had my first taste of cocaine. When I was 13, we moved down here to Florida to get my sister out of her destructive behaviors, because 3 rehabs didn't work. But we all know how that works out. If you don't work the program, you don't work the steps, nothing's going to happen. So you're probably wondering, though, why I never told my parents about the abuse. Well, fear is actually a pretty big thing for a child, even at 13. When we moved here, things didn't get better. My sister soon got pregnant at the age of 15, and I was 13. It wasn't long after that I first attempted suicide. You see, I was so sick and tired of my parents paying attention to my sister, trying to help her out, and here I was, on the sidelines, not getting the attention I needed. But I was still dealing with my medical issues as well. So I had all of that going on, and yet I still wasn't getting the love that I needed. So at 15, I had had 2 more surgeries, and one of those surgeries, I was overdosed on morphine, and I flatlined in the hospital. In 12th grade, I had had another surgery, and I missed out on all my graduation activities. I did walk across the stage though because I was destined to get my diploma, but I ended up having staples in my back while I did it. By the time I graduated, I had started to drink, gamble, do drugs, and got into pornography. Over the next few years, I eventually suppressed all these feelings of hatred and anger I had towards my family. When I was 20 years old and I first met my wife, Kelly, happened to be in the audience. We met in a pool hall, and she actually blew me off at first, so I saw it as a challenge. Right, men, we love challenges, right? We dated for about 6 months before I decided to get back with an ex. You see, I couldn't handle the love that she was giving me. I felt like I didn't deserve it. I felt like she didn't deserve to have someone who was messed up like me in her life. Soon after I got back with my ex, my destructive behaviors continued. My drinking and gambling were out of control, as was my drug use. At this point, I was doing every drug out there besides heroin. You see, I didn't like needles, go figure. About a year and a half later, I reconnected with my wife, Kelly, and we dated for about 3 months before I decided to propose to her because I wanted to be a better father and husband than my father was to me. So I was destined to get married. A little over a year later, after we got married, things started going downhill. Little by little, I'm starting to show signs of anger and frustrations and things like that. But by 25, we had our son Michael, and what a blessing he was. You see, I was told I could never have kids as well. So God showed up once again, and he showed off, giving me a blessing. And all this time, I never knew God. I never knew who he was. I never knew he existed anything. It wasn't long after my son was born did my anger and problems in the past begin to come up, and my addictions began to get the best of me. My anger was so bad that there was a time when I had just gotten off the phone with my mother. My mother was helping my sister out with buying a trailer and furniture and things like that, and this was the umpteenth time that she helped her out. And it really got to me, and I got so angry that I hung up the phone and I went and grabbed a baseball bat and headed outside. The next thing I remember, I was kneeling in the yard, my hands were bleeding, I had a welt on the side of my head, and I was crying, and I had no idea what just happened. My wife was holding my 10-month-old son at the time, and she saw the whole thing, and she told me, she said, "David, you went outside with a baseball bat and you started hitting a tree. And while you were hitting the tree, there was a wasp nest in the tree. And the wasp came down and started pelting your head. But I was holding the bat so hard that my fingernails embedded into the skin of my hands as I was hitting the tree, and I broke the bat." It wasn't long after that incident that I decided I needed to get help. I needed to figure out what was going on with me and how I could control this, because I really didn't want my wife and son to be exposed to this. It was about a month after this that I was diagnosed with bipolar I disorder, anxiety, and PTSD. I struggled with the diagnosis that I had gotten because I didn't want to come face to face with those. And I struggled taking medications as well. There was another blackout episode that happened not long after this. This one was quite a doozy because to this day I still don't remember it. My wife again witnessed this, and I went and got a knife out of the kitchen, and I sat down on the kitchen table and I started playing Russian roulette. Basically, I was taking the knife and stabbing between my fingers and going faster and faster and faster. And she was pleading with me to stop, and I wouldn't stop, and I started lashing out in anger. So she had no choice but to get my son out of there. And she called the cops, and the cops came, and they escorted me out in handcuffs. This led me to be in and out of 4 psych rehabs over the next year and a half. When I turned 28, things got even worse for me. I had had 7 surgeries in 6 months, and I ended up addicted to pain pills. It was like around 2005, I believe. But anyway, I developed an addiction to these so bad that in order to supply my needs, I tried doctor shopping. Now, for those that don't know what that is, it's basically going to all your doctors, trying to get the same medication and trying to get insurance to cover it. But they wouldn't do it. So I eventually turned to gambling more and more. I would go out, try to win money, get that money and buy the pills and so on. Eventually, I ended up became in debt to a loan shark for about $65,000. That's right, $65,000. My wife suspected I was addicted to the pills, but not the loan shark. See, we also began having intimacy issues because I was looking at pornography so much. In order to supply my need for the pills, I would sell a few at McDonald's, where I worked as a manager. It was there I met this woman who I would befriend. See, my marriage was really on the rocks, and I would insist nothing was going on, but I would go and help this lady move. I would help her fix her car, fix things. But see, I neglected the things in my marriage. I remember this particular time, my wife and I were sitting outside, and she was crying her eyes out, and I was just telling her that my marriage was fine. You know, you're crazy. There's nothing going on. I was ignoring her feelings. See, I was a narcissistic butthead, as I like to call it. The only thing I cared about was myself and my own selfish needs. I had stopped taking my medications for bipolar, anxiety, and PTSD. And by December 2008, my wife and I separated for the third and final time. I went to stay with my mom in Kentucky. That was the longest 980-mile drive I had to take. By then, I was struggling with 4 addictions, separated from my wife, dealing with anger and my own selfish needs. I eventually had to sit down and tell my mom everything that had happened and what was going on. She was not very happy with me, as moms would hopefully be. She eventually helped me pay off my loan, and she helped me get on the right track. My wife even decided not to divorce me because she had medical insurance that would cover most of the things that I needed to get help with. And she wanted me to be a better father to our son. But in her eyes, as far as our marriage was concerned, we were done. And rightfully so. Now, you would think things couldn't possibly get even worse for me, but you'd be wrong. See, by late 2009, my mom got really sick, and she sat me and my sister down and told us that she wouldn't make it until next Christmas. It wasn't until the end of 2010 in May that she fell and broke 7 ribs, busted her knee, as well as fractured her arm. This was really tough for me because I knew she was going to be having a hard time recovering from this, and I didn't know if she was going to make it. On June 10th, 2010, about 2 weeks after she fell and was in the hospital with these serious injuries, that I decided to take my own life. See, I was standing at the edge of the Ohio River, contemplating my life and what had happened. See, I couldn't bear the fact that her not being here, and I sat there examining my life and the consequences of my actions that I brought into my life. The hurts, hang-ups, and habits that I had caused from my addictions. See, I wasn't the husband and father I needed to be, and I also wasn't the man that God called me to be. Here I am 1,000 miles from nowhere, my wife and son, and a son I hadn't seen but 3 times in 2 years, and I was struggling with those 4 addictions. So I stepped to the edge of the Ohio River and I jumped. But out of the blue, out of nowhere, something pushed me back and onto the ground. I couldn't tell you to this day what it was, but it was some kind of force. And I stood up and I was so confused and I was crying because I was trying to figure out, why didn't this work? Because I had nothing left. So I decided I needed to go back to the hospital and help my mom and be there for her. On June 13th, 2010, 3 days after that incident, my mom passed away at the age of 52. But Here's the intervention part. See, right before, I'm getting goosebumps from it because this is, right before she passed away, her body was shutting down. I don't know if anybody's experienced anybody passing away with their body contorts. They kind of moan, they groan, those kind of things. She had not said a word in a few days, and she was in a coma. But it was about 4 in the morning on June 13th that she said the words, "Get out, Walter." Now, Walter was her father who passed away 10 years prior to this. So I got up trying to figure out, what did I just hear? I don't understand. I was wiping my eyes, because I was waking up. As I got up and I started walking towards her, this slight breeze came through and the room got cold. Cold like you could see her breath cold. And I smelled perfume. Now mind you, we were in a closed room with only one window that was closed. As I smelled this perfume, I thought to myself, I know exactly what this perfume is. It was my grandmother's perfume. Okay, now my grandmother passed away 10 years prior to this as well. So as I got next to my mom's bed and I sat down, she said the word "Mom." Now I started bawling my eyes out and I fell to my knees because that was it. I knew this was going to be the end and I didn't know what to do. But as I hit my knees, I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I heard the words, "I'm here for you." Now I know who it was. I didn't know God, I didn't know who it was, but I knew it was God. Because I felt this calmness come over me. I felt this peace, that I knew everything was going to be okay. Over the next few days after my mom passed away, God and I talked to each other. We kind of wrestled with each other, argued, kind of things, like Jacob did in the wilderness. And he finally asked me, "What do you want, David? What do you want from me?" And I said, "I want my family back. I want my wife and son." So he laid out a path that led me back to Florida and into Courageous. It was there that I met Jerry Batista, who happened to be the husband of the lady who told my wife about this men's group. I went on to heal so badly that when I walked in there, it was testimony night, and I wanted to share my testimony. I wanted to get rid of all this baggage so bad. Now, Jerry was so scared because he didn't know me from Adam. How would you like if somebody you didn't know come up and ask, "Hey, I want to share my testimony, hey, I want to talk." But on September 7th, 2010, I stepped in there, and I haven't had a drink, looked at porn, did drugs, or gambled. I worked hard in the group setting, and Courageous taught me how to deal with my anger and let go of my past transgressions. They taught me how to love me again. They believed in me that I was greater than all of my addictions. They helped me with the steps I needed to take in order to get my family back. It was in 2011, and I'll never forget this. See, I was working overnights at Walmart, and I was staying. My wife decided to let me stay back at the house because my son was in elementary school, and I needed to pick him up from school, so that's why she was at work. But on this particular day, her car wouldn't start, and she needed a new battery. And we decided to go get the battery, and I installed it for her. The next thing I know, out of the blue, I got a kiss on the lips. First kiss I had gotten from her in 3 years. I knew I was on the right track. In October that year, I moved back into the house and began the healing of my marriage. Over the course of the next year or so, I focused on my sobriety and I focused on my marriage. I humbled myself and let God do his thing. I allowed my wife to be vulnerable and lash out at me to help her heal. You see, for years she walked on eggshells around me and she needed to express her grief. My son was so happy to have me home. He loved that I had changed and was the father he needed. He was 9 when I moved back in. It felt so good to hold him again. It felt so good to hold them both in my arms. God finally led me home. It was in 2012, my wife and I attended a married life class, and it was called Intimate Encounters. It was just to get a deep, respect for your marriage. We got picked to tell our testimony, at the end of year celebration, and we did it on video, and they showed it on the screen. To this day, I can't remember anything about that testimony but one thing. My wife said in that testimony speech, she said that while I was separated from David, I prayed and prayed for a godly man to enter my life. I would have never guessed in a million years it was the man I was already married to. I carry that in my heart and mind every day. It is a reminder of how far I've come and what God has done for me and my family. See, I'm new to the CR family, but I'm not new to the struggles and victories we have in recovery. I have attended many AA, NA, GA meetings in the last 10 years, and I can tell you I'm glad to call CR my safe place. God's grace and mercy are not earned, it's given. His Son, Jesus Christ, paid for our sins. Now we need to give him our all. I'm reminded of this verse, Matthew 11, 28 through 30. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy burdened, for I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. God reminds me every day of the love he has for me. He reminds me with every breath I take. With those breaths, I will shout at the top of my lungs what a gift he gave me, a second chance at life. I know I would not be here today without his mercy and grace. You see, God shows up in amazing ways every day. We've just got to be ready to accept him into our lives. Thank you.